Do You Do, the podcast that explores various occupations and industries and arms you with information about what that position entails and how someone gets that job. This show is for anyone who's ready for a career change or who's just entering the workforce. What will we discover today? Lean in and enjoy the show with your host, Chris.
Welcome to the What Do You Do, the Career Podcast, episode 007, the James Bond episode. In this episode, we're going to speak with Danny, who is a data analyst. He works for a hospital and he compiles data to help get points across that from the data they have to how they can use it, and so it could be understood by the board of directors, doctors, whoever they're talking to. Get the raw data and turn it into something. It was pretty neat. I've never really knew about data analytics and analysis, and he really does a great job of explaining it to you like you're five, which is taking something complex and making it simple. It's a very good episode. It was a lot of fun. He came and saved me. I needed an interview, and I posted on Reddit, and he came and saved the day. So big thumbs up to Danny for doing this. So before we begin, just wanted to start off and say, start now. Make it happen. I read that the other day, and I thought it was pretty awesome. It means a lot, and pretty encouraging. And on to the interview now, I guess. Before we begin, I'd like to go ahead and mention that we now are on iTunes, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Play FM. A lot of the podcast writers are picking us up now, so if you could take a listen, review the show, rate it on iTunes if you can. If there's something you don't like, please let me know. info@whatdoyoudopodcast.com, or just shoot me an email, chris@whatdoyoudopodcast.com. And let's just try to make this as best as we can. I'm here, I'm listening, and I need that feedback. And I really appreciate everything we do. So let's go ahead and get on with the interview. All right, I'm here with Danny. He is a data analyst. He works at a hospital. He compiles data ranging from just about everything from what we've discussed. But I will let him dive in and tell us a little bit more about what he does. So, Danny, would you mind go ahead and give us a quick, brief overview of what your job as a data analyst is?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Really, there's so much data in any kind of job. So mine's in a hospital setting, but there's so much and people just don't really know what to do with it. It's kind of started, a lot of people started doing like reporting and things. Reporting's been really, really big, and there's been a big upswing. But a lot of analysts now are kind of taking that a step further and trying to get really actionable things out of that data and trying to visualize it quite well in a way that the average person can take a quick glance at it and really understand sometimes very advanced concepts. And taking things to that level can be very difficult. The one sentence way that I usually tell people is that a good analyst can take numbers and turn it into sentences that people can understand. So that's the super quick version, I guess.
Is being a data analyst a job you knew about when you were younger, or did you stumble upon it later on in life?
I completely stumbled upon it. I went to college. I started as a film student, more or less, media studies as they called it. And then I switched to a double major with marketing. And then I ended up just graduating with a major in marketing and a minor in media studies. And marketing always really intrigued me because that's where you got a lot of data. How do you want to reach these clients? Well, you have all of these customers in this area and demographics and all of those sorts of things, and trying to tune products to hit them at good price points. Price was something I was really, really interested in. And it kind of turned out that once I got some exposure to just kind of how things worked in the job world through internships and things, data was really the thing that I was getting at, not so much marketing. So immediately out of college, I basically started as a data analyst right away, skipped marketing entirely, have never used it. But ever since then, I've come out and been a data analyst.
What do you like the most about being a data analyst?
I think the coolest thing is that it's just the ability to create something. And there's so much to it because when you first start, you run reports and you say, okay, what percentage of this does this? And, those basic questions that you can answer with a pie graph and things like that. But then you start getting into, okay, given the last 3 months of how this has been going, what's going to happen 28 days from now, 31 days from now, 2 months from now, and figuring out, well, do we have enough data to accurately kind of project what that's going to be? How accurate do we end up being when we try to do that? And what will that enable a business to do? So, for example, in the hospital, you could say, we only have X number of beds for patients, and we need to reserve some for people who come in for emergencies or people who come in from certain types of surgery. So it's like, okay, let's take all of our surgery data. We know a lot of that's scheduled. And so we take all of those. We figure out how long are these people maybe going to stay based on pretty much their entire medical history. And then we need to make sure that we can reserve enough for emergency medical care. And that's really tough to predict because it's emergency, but given enough volume, you can kind of guess, which makes it really interesting. So that allows, say, a hospital to have open beds when there's a car accident or somebody needs a place. We can ensure that we have enough, or if we don't, we can take precautions to make sure everyone can get the care that they need.
I think also you could see like a pattern of data. Like I would guess like on the weekends, the chances of emergencies would be higher due to, people being stupid at the bars or, extracurricular activities. So maybe with your data, you could, kind of foresee that.
Oh yeah. And
plan accordingly.
There's some things that just come up that you never expect. For example, the hospital I work at is in kind of a poorer part of the city. So what happens is we have a ton of people who are on some sort of government assistance for Medicaid. And one of the big drawbacks of that is that a lot of them, they kind of get standard rates across the board. So we have people who come into our emergency room all the time to get a prescription refilled, for example, or they just need a basic checkup. Because of the way some of those things can be structured, there's no penalty for coming into an emergency room. There's no extra premium for them. Now, I don't want to blame the people themselves. I mean, I would love to say that I wouldn't use that in that way, but we're all kind of lazy, and I'm sure just about anybody would if there's no difference and you need something done like that, especially if you have, a tough work schedule or something. So we have to take those things into account, even though there's nothing we can do to stop it. We do our best with education, and on the other end, we try to restructure those things so that people aren't utilizing emergency room visits in a way that's not great for anyone. The more that they can schedule those things out, the better. So yeah, it can really, really vary in terms of the reasoning behind what you see. And there's so many layers, but that's part of our job, is to dig into that and figure out exactly how to uncover the bits that we say can predict and then leave some margin for error for what we can't.
So like back home in West Virginia where I'm at, I know from friends that are, ER doctors, there would be times when you would have nothing but, people that have, addiction problems coming in to try to get, their refills to, I guess get their fix. And I'm sure those kinds, if you have a lot of those happening, that would mess up the numbers for trying to calculate emergencies versus surgeries versus, trying to scale that out. If you had that happening?
Not that I know of in our area, luckily. There's not a high percentage of drug use. I'm sure it happens, as it does everywhere. But yeah, one of the cooler things is that hospitals are kind of structured now, or at least the one that I'm working at. They're trying to take patients away from having to come back a whole lot and figure out what's going on. And patients who come back over and over again within, say, a month's time, the hospital actually gets penalized. Now, whether it's the hospital's fault for not treating them properly the first time or just the patient comes back for kind of a bogus reason, whatever that might be, the hospital ends up kind of paying for that. They're trying to switch away from an old model, which was basically that the hospital got money every time they did anything for a patient. So any service, if you came in with, say, an abdominal problem and they wanted to maybe put you on a pharmacy drug to maybe try to clear something up, they wanted to get, a scan in that area, an endoscopy, something like that, they would schedule all those and just do all of them. Because for you, it sounds nice because they're taking care of any potential problem, but the hospital also can ring up charges a lot that way. And some of them still do that. When I was a kid, my main doctor that I went to, I found out later, she used to give a class to other doctors in the area about how to basically maximize revenue out of patients. And one of the best things that I've seen, and why I really love working for the hospital that I do, is they're switching to kind of this other model, which says, okay, we know any patient that comes in, they should pay about X amount for that treatment. And for the hospital, if we can beat that, if we can basically beat the average more or less by getting them really efficient care that takes care of the problem quickly, basically we get to split the difference and with the insurance company and keep some of the extra that they would have had to pay. And that's really nice because it incentivizes everyone to kind of take care of patients the right way as best they can. So to go back to kind of your original one, it's even more of a thing now that we want to get those patients, help that they need potentially, whatever that might be, because if they keep coming back for the same sorts of things over and over, that's actually really going to penalize the hospital. So we may be better off to try to get them into any kind of treatment or whatever they would need. So it's really aligning patient health and the hospital incentives in a really great way.
So when you talk about penalize, is it like a monetary penalization or the insurance companies charge more? What's the penalty?
Yeah, they don't really charge more. It's basically saying, okay, you have X dollars to treat this patient. And if you do under that, you keep the difference. If you pay over that, you pay the difference. So basically how far off you miss, there can be, small penalties or big ones. That's a simplified look at it. But, for the average person, I think you can see that that's a better system than just charging the patient for whatever they may or may not need.
Yeah. It seems like if they're being effective, it's going to keep costs down around the board because they're with not having the penalties, they can be more efficient with the servicing of the patients. And
yeah, for sure.
Everyone seems to be a little bit happier. What was one of the most important things or more appealing things about being a data analyst that you found so far in this career?
That's a tough thing to answer, but I think it's kind of this inner desire for me to use my entire brain, as I call it. I've always been really attracted to things, and I was a big video gamer throughout my childhood and now. And I think one of the greatest things that it brought me was it was an activity where I could put my full brain power into what I was doing because there was enough going on, just on screen, but there's also enough strategically that you need to think through. So typically your harder, more advanced, tough, really hard games were great because that just meant I could use more and more of my brain power. So that kind of trickled over into the same sort of itch is scratched by doing data analytics. There's so much there, and you're thinking about some of these really advanced concepts and how things are fitting together. And it's a really fun exercise because you can get into a project and it takes you 4 hours of thinking harder than you did all week, and it comes out great. And so that's one of the things I love most about it is just that ability to be fully entrenched in a project and giving it kind of all the brain power that you possibly can.
It sounds like there's a lot of thinking outside the box too. Like you said,
Yeah, there can be.
Your brain, you're having to tap in. I mean, for me, math and numbers, no go. Like it's just not my thing. But I'm assuming once your brain's pumping and you're thinking deep and you're producing these results, and then when you go to present it, I mean, that's your baby you've been working on. So you dug all this stuff up, put it together. Here it is.
Yeah, and actually that brings up one of the toughest parts about the entire job is that no matter how much work you put into something or how complicated something is, you need to be able to explain and display it in the most simple way possible. That's kind of the rub a little bit, because you'll go into a meeting or something and your end goal, your ultimate, you did a great job, is if everyone looks at what you've done and they're like, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of obvious. That's the exact response you're looking for, because that means you built the case very well. Everyone understood everything. It rarely happens, but if you can articulate things really clearly and well, it's one of those things that they say on Reddit a lot. If you know something well, you can explain it to a 5-year-old. Same sort of thing applies.
Like
you need to be able to take this to the people it applies to. Oh, yeah. And if you can't, then it's really tough, because we talk to a lot of people who aren't big into math and numbers, and we can't just data vomit all over them. We need to be really concise with what we tell them and put it in a way that they can understand very, very quickly. And they're the ones making the decisions, so they need to be able to take what we've done and then, apply it to the business.
Usually, would you be talking to like boards of directors with this information, or would it be like department heads or doctors or?
Kind of yes to all of them. It just depends on who's working on what, how important it is, the size. We work with, department heads. Sometimes these are doctors who are extremely intelligent people, aren't necessarily data intelligent. It's the classic thing. I couldn't do their job. They probably couldn't do my job either way, but we work together. So they come up with a question, and it's another one of the problems is because there's so much data, they can ask a completely rational, totally simple, seemingly simple question that can be really hard to answer. So they could say, okay, I want to know, of all my diabetic patients that have been in my office for the last 12 months, how many of them are refilling their prescriptions on a regular basis? And the problem comes in with trying to figure out all the different pieces. So all these things don't necessarily live in the same database. So we sometimes have like a payment system that is separate from our patient list. So we need to find the patient and then try to find all the payment data that might match up. And then we kind of have to blend those two together. And sometimes it's a little harder than it seems. That's one of the toughest thing that I know any data analyst listening to this knows, that sometimes half the job is figuring out how those pieces fit together to answer sometimes those seemingly very simple questions.
So it seems like also like good record keeping and organization is a good skill to have to make this easier.
Yeah, and for people who work in like IT and things, a lot of times they have other business needs. This data thing isn't like it's been around forever, so we have all these amazing things and it was designed this way for the ground up. Like medical records were originally designed for not necessarily linking large groups of them up and connecting. They were meant so you could look at one patient at a time, not necessarily to just go bananas with an entire 2 million person population in a certain area and figure out what's going on there. So it's kind of like you have a legacy problem where it wasn't built for that originally, and you can't just like, all right, well, we're going to throw out all the old stuff and start over. So you get this kind of slow build, and that's why those artifacts and things are tough to get rid of, because they were necessary either now or at some point in the past, and it wasn't designed for this one specific purpose. So that makes it sometimes very interesting.
What's your normal schedule like? Is it a 9-to-5 job or lots of overtime, or do you see your new wife much?
Oh yeah. See the wife plenty, which is great. It's really easy. We have pretty flexible hours. It can vary by company that you worked for, but we basically are on salary, so we can come in and go kind of as we please, as long as we definitely put in our set hours. But, if I need to go in a half hour later, leave a half hour earlier, things like that, not a big deal. There can be overtime, just like anything else. If you get really entrenched in a project, sometimes you have to do that. Working from home is not quite as big of a deal as it might be in some other places, because sometimes you literally have days where you lock yourself in your office and you don't do anything else. So it doesn't really matter where you do that from, at work or at home. So we have a lot of flexibility, which I think is becoming more of the norm, but isn't necessarily standard across the industry for sure.
Where do you see yourself in the next couple of years?
It's interesting because I don't know if I'll ever get out of doing what I'm doing now, maybe into management or something like that. But that heart of, getting at these answers and data, there's such a giant ceiling to get better at it. There's always something that you can do more and more. So I think finding a good company, which the one I'm at has been great so far, and I think they do understand this concept, but understanding that sometimes just building on years and years of experience can be extremely valuable. So maybe in 5 years, I'm still a data analyst, but maybe I'm hopefully far better than I am today at it.
For the companies, can you work like independently as you're like a contractor? Is that feasible, or is it more like you work for the business to do it as a salaried employee?
I would say vast majority are as salaried employees, but there are new groups. That is kind of one of the cutting edge things, is these basically analytic groups that they're basically contracted to come in for a specific purpose. They may say, hey, build us this statistical model. Here's your data, or consult with us on how we should do these things. So there's a really new space there where there are now basically like analytic companies that you can basically hire out. They'll come in and do a whole job kind of thing for you. So some companies are opting for that because it's just not feasible for them to bring in 3, 4 or more data analysts who have that kind of high power to do those things.
It sounds like they have the kind of on-demand IT services where you can contract out your IT work because you might not need to staff someone, 24 hours. So you can hire them to come in on demand. So it sounds like kind of like there's a new fad for maybe on-demand analytics.
Yeah, basically the same thing is like a lot of website builders do the same thing. Your company needs a website. They just need it built and then maintained and, changes and things, but they don't want to hire somebody full time to do that because it's not going to be a core part of their business. So yeah, definitely very, very similar.
Little off the wall question. What did you see yourself being as a child, as a job?
I started in film. I think that's kind of the first job that at least I can remember that I was actually serious about doing. So film was always very close to me, which I think is a very, very odd transition to analytics. That tends to be right brain to left brain. But it's really interesting how the two fit together. They're both very, very different in terms of execution. And I think they, as I said earlier, they scratch a little bit different itches that exist inside of me. But yeah, I think it was film. And then I just found this data thing, found I was pretty good at it and really, really enjoyed it. Never would have seen myself. Like, I didn't enjoy math. I hated math all through school. I never liked it. So people hear that and they're like, well, why would you want to do numbers all day? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It's really fun for me.
I can agree because like in high school, I think the highest math I completed was pre-algebra. Like it just didn't, jive with me. But in college, they're like, okay, here's statistics. And I took it. And, I hated math, but I did great. Like I found enjoyment in it and it was fun because it turned into like puzzles and fun. And so I had a good time doing it. And statistics 1 and 2, I aced them. And if you were to see me do that, back in high school, no way.
Oh yeah.
I didn't find it fun. It wasn't. Then again, I'm probably older now, so I can focus better. But who knows? It's pretty cool though when you find that job that you kind of never really thought of doing, and then you're doing it. To be able to look back on that.
And it kind of sucks because, to be honest, I wish I would have paid more attention in math or maybe done more math-related things. We talk all the time. We were sitting in my office the other day, me and a coworker, and we're looking at these graphs and trying to figure out these things and trying to calculate some pretty advanced stuff. And I was like, we're literally looking at this doing calculus in Excel, more or less. We didn't know the formulas, but it's like the concepts that we learned from calculus, integrals, derivatives, that sort of thing. It's like we're doing this and we're probably doing it in a grossly insufficient way, or inefficient, I should say. But we still want to do it because we can look, and that's definitely what we need to do. So seeing some of those reasonings behind the math would have been really, really great back in the day. So I think maybe if I went back, I might have a new appreciation for it.
Also, back in the day, I don't know about you, but we were always talking about math. We're never going to use this again when we get older.
Right.
But, again, that's a lie we were telling ourselves because it's all around you. You got to use it. And now more so, my 8-year-old, hey, I need homework help. It's just that thing that always keeps coming back for more, I guess.
Yeah, it's so hard to teach too. I completely understand the tough parts because the application of it is the more difficult thing that you want people to think about. You're never going to have a board where it just says, x squared plus 2x plus 4 equals negative 16 or whatever it would be. Go find the answer. It's not going to happen like that, but trying to find the slope of a line or trying to figure out the area underneath of a curve, it manifests itself in some really interesting ways sometimes.
I think you kind of already answered it, but if you could change one thing on the journey of your life so far to, graduating high school to finding this job, what's one thing you would have done differently?
I think I would try to find an analytics program for college instead of marketing, which happened to be very close. But I think finding an analytics major of some sort, which I know is rare, would be really, really helpful and would have gotten me right on track. That way I could be doing the same thing, but I might have a little bit better toolkit in order to do it with.
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like it's, again, this job, the job title data analyst, it can go, 20 different ways depending on the company, I guess, depending on the environment. And I think you did a solid job of explaining it to me like I'm 5.
I've had to a lot.
For the data analyst in a hospital. And I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it anytime.
Is there any subreddits devoted to, data analysts or any resources out there that you can think of?
There was, unfortunately, a great one called Data is Beautiful was the subreddit, and they were really, really good. And then they got added to the default, and now it's basically, look, I have a graph, and the stuff isn't as cool. Some of the posts back in the day, not to sound like a hipster or anything, but some of the stuff when it was relatively unknown were amazingly cool, and people were doing incredible things and showing data in really innovative ways that was not just pleasing to look at, but was really, really informative. And that's the key piece. You can make things look cool fairly easily, but in order to portray a point very clearly, it's tough. So if anybody knows any, post a comment or something wherever this is inevitably posted. And I would love to see some more of the old school stuff that used to be on there.
I'll tell you, the one thing that gets me every time is infographics, where people just break it down and then they have the really cool art. And it's like, I can read those all day long and just go on, because they have them for almost everything. It seems like any kind of topic, there's infographics for it. I I've read Titanic. I've read statistics on politics and religions, and someone's done the numbers.
Yeah, it can be great. That's one of the those have been great recently. That's been a big surge, and people are usually pretty good at putting those together, at least as kind of like a quick, 1-page sort of summary of a large group of data. It can be pretty cool. It's interesting to see the evolution from, your pie graphs and bar graphs into some of these really abstract and weird sorts of graphs that do a really good job, even if you haven't quite seen that type of graph before.
It's the new trend, I guess. It's, again, explain it to me like I'm 5. And that's the best, most efficient way to do it. And, usually pictures, the old saying, worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
Make it simple. Was it KISS? Keep it simple, stupid.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Danny. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for everything. And best of luck on your journey to find the most interesting jobs.
Thanks for listening in today, and be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss that one episode that can change your career path. We're passionate about sharing all the possibilities of occupations out there, and we'd like to keep moving full steam ahead. Consider becoming a patron of the show and go to patreon.com/whatdoyoudopodcast to see how you can support the show.